All right, we're going to deviate tonight. Not be deviant, we're going to just deviate. What's a letter, Ray? What? Deviate.
At least it's not deviant, that's what it used to be.
So we're going to look at the crucifixion some today. We'll do something a little different, probably words of the cross on Friday. But, huh? You can look up Psalm 22 if you want to. I'm going to start off with John 10. John 10 is where I'm going to. Richard already had it? Well, we'll go to Isaiah too. We can hop around a little bit. And in true Glenn fashion, I forgot my notes. So if you guys want to interact and bring up some things along the way too, I would love that, to be honest with you. Huh?
Can we do it at the beginning?
Sure.
Do you think Judas is in heaven?
Do I think Judas is in heaven? No.
Because of his response to when he took the 30 pieces back, and he threw it there and he said, I have sinned.
I've betrayed innocent blood.
Yeah, I have sinned.
Yep.
And it showed repentance, or showed, not necessarily repentance, but showed, well,
Yeah. Yeah, no.
I don't know, it's kind of like,
Nah.
yeah, but obviously
Well.
he said innocent blood.
Here's the thing. He didn't go to Jesus and ask for his sins to be forgiven. He went to the high priest and threw back and tried to get out of what he did.
He didn't try to get his sins forgiven. He just
Right.
And they were like, okay.
So think about it like this. He was trying to, I think he might have thought that throwing that money back in there would have bought the freedom of Jesus, right? He got Jesus free instead of going to Jesus and need to be made free himself.
Because here's the thing, he had to, because of prophecy, because of what God already had moving, there had to be one to do that, right?
Yeah.
So he's being used of God in that fashion. And the thing is, I was just reading through it the other day, and I was like, this is kind of interesting, because you kind of skip over that part sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like, man, he was broken. I mean, he killed himself over it, right?
Right.
And I was like, here's a question for Glenn. Oh, just because it says that Satan entered him, but Satan didn't. If Satan stayed in him, he would have brought the money back. If it was something that was going to be, permanent, he'd have kept the money. He'd be like, hey, why did all this happen? You know what I mean? So it never says, that the devil left him, Satan left him. But it's interesting to think about.
I actually personally think that probably Satan was already gone by the time he did that. I mean, Jesus looked at all 12 of them and said, haven't I not chosen you 12 and one of you is the devil? So I don't know that that doesn't seem like a real prophetic, you're going to repent and...
But his history was kind of weird, though, you know what I mean? For someone that you would...
He's also called, they're referred to as the son of perdition, and so is Antichrist.
Right.
So, yeah. What?
Judas's whole reason for being existing was to betray Christ. That's the reason he was born, right?
It depends on how. I mean.
Nobody can be created to be a descendant, right?
Well,
See, here's the thing. It depends on what perspective you're looking at. So if you're going to be a Reformed theologian and look at it from God's perspective, then yeah, he was born just to do that. That was his whole mission in life, and he had no choice.
he was a pawn.
But that also, the direction they take that is, nobody really has a choice. There's no free will. So nobody really has a choice about being saved. Nobody really has a choice about not being saved. You're born to be what you're going to be. And it's all predetermined before you're even born. Now, did God know that Judas was the one that was going to do it? Yes. Yeah. But did Judas have opportunity along the way to embrace Jesus for who he was? He had the same opportunities everybody else had, right? So one is rejecting and doing things for himself, like stealing from the treasury, and the others. I mean, I forgot my thought now. Just gone. Anyways,
Sorry, man.
no, that's all right. But he had the opportunity. So you maybe see it more specifically played out with Pharaoh, just because it really says. But in the beginning of Pharaoh's deal there, even when the 10 plagues started, he had his choice. He said Pharaoh hardened his heart.
Yeah, that too, yeah.
Right, and so the first couple, it says Pharaoh hardened his heart. But after that, it says God hardened Pharaoh's heart. So I think by the time Judas betrayed Jesus, it was already a done deal for him, most likely. Yes. Right. Yes. Yeah, he does. He knew. Well, in Romans chapter 8 says that, whom he foreknew, he also predestined. Right. But it's not predestined as in, I'm going to create this one to betray you. I'm going to create this one. I think God looks through all of history, knowing the end from the beginning, and said, this one's going to accept me, this one's not. And we see all through the Bible that God takes even evil people and uses them to get his will done. Yeah. And even some of them, like Nebuchadnezzar. I will be way less surprised to see Nebuchadnezzar in heaven than I will Judas. Much more surprised to see Judas, because Nebuchadnezzar, it appears, did finally submit to God. We even have his own words written in Daniel. So, you know, and you have a lot of guys that started off good and ended bad, like Solomon and like Saul. And now I think you see in some of Solomon's writings, in the end, he probably came back around and understood. And, right. Yeah. I would, Saul, on the other hand, I think started off well, but I think his true heart came out in that he wanted to do what he wanted to do and would do what he wanted to do and never repented from it. And I would be really surprised to see him there. So, but.
So do you think that Judas is throwing the money back or trying to give the money back was his way to try to absolve his own guilt? Or was it just...
Yeah, I think he was trying to undo what he did.
Sure, yeah.
undo what he did, so
Yeah.
get Jesus back out.
And then they're like,
Right.
we're not taking it. Here's
Yeah.
what it is. He throws it on the floor of the temple, because he went
Right.
in the temple to give it back, and walked out. And,
And so he's thrown blood money. So technically he's defiled the temple because he's thrown blood money into the
well,
temple.
they can't use it for anything, that's why they bought the potter's field.
Right.
They couldn't put it in the treasury,
Yeah.
because they knew.
Yes.
And it's so weird how they justified all that, you know what I mean? Because they knew it was blood money.
Yeah.
They knew it was all fake, because it had a lot of witnesses that couldn't even
Well, they knew it was a set. I mean, it was a setup.
set up, because they plotted to do it.
That's the thing. They weren't just watching Jesus for those 3.5 years. They were watching the people who followed him. They knew who they could get and play on his pride and his greed to get him to betray Jesus. I mean, if they were close enough to hear his objection to Mary pouring the oil on Jesus' head and anointing him literally for his burial, she understood what was going to happen, and none of his disciples understood. But he's the one that objects and tries to get everybody worked up about, money that we could have taken it and sold it and give it to the poor.
Well, really,
So,
really, Judas, they didn't go to Judas. Judas went to them, I think, didn't he?
well, Judas was there. Judas,
I mean, to the high priest and elders. Didn't Judas go to them?
I think there had to be some kind of communication that we don't necessarily see.
Because I think I was reading, either Matthew or John. I don't know if it was John's recollection of it, but anyway, I thought that he said something about
And maybe because Jesus but see, Satan is directing him at that point.
Sure.
Then, if it's Judas' idea and he's going and going to say, hey, let's do the dirty deed here. That's Satan working through him. Because think about this, and when Judas is there, and Jesus says to him at that supper, "Go and do what you're going to do, and do it quickly."
Right.
Who's he talking to? Is he talking to Satan, or is he talking to Judas? Because
He was
Satan
talking to
entered.
Satan at that time because
Right. Satan entered his body. Right.
after he took a bite, took the bread from him.
Yeah.
When he left Jesus' hand into his hand, he says Satan entered him.
Mm-hmm.
So then he tells him to go do what he's got to do after
Right.
he ate it. Yeah, so I don't think he's talking.
Not so much to Judas as he is to Satan at that point.
No, that's interesting. I just had to throw that out.
No, yeah, that's fine.
Wind everybody up a little bit.
Hey, you helped me kill 15 minutes. So
You didn't even tell me we do.
I know we didn't even set this up. Anybody else have some observations you want to throw out there?
I got one thought that, just in case anybody doesn't realize, you made a comment about the difference in the dates between Passover and Easter. There's really no correlation between the dates, because Passover, the day for Passover was set by God, by the Jewish calendar.
Right.
The day for Easter is the first Sunday following the first full moon, following the spring equinox. So there's
Right.
really no correlation between the 2 days.
Yeah, they're often separated at least by a couple of days. The actual Passover, yeah, the Seder part of the Passover, but it is usually all in that 1 week
Yeah.
from what we would call Palm Sunday to Easter. The Passover is usually around there too. Yeah. But this is just way, I mean, this is a whole month later. It's a little weird.
How often do the Jewish calendar add them up?
I think 7 times within a 1900
So during that time, that's when they're way off, right? When they add that extra leap month?
they would add month of Adar 1-4, they had Adar 1 and Adar 2.
Yeah. So they had a whole extra month. It's their leap month. But how often do they do it?
Well, it's 7 times in a 19-year period, but it's
Okay.
kind of,
Well, yeah, that it's amazing how much 5 days throws the whole count off. You know, you're talking 360-day years compared to 365-day years. So that's why the prophecy in Daniel, when they give the order to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah, until that what we call Palm Sunday, that is figured differently, and they have to figure leap months instead of just leap days, and because it's set on that 360-day year rather than a 365-day year. And I think at the time, I could be wrong about this, but I think at the time everybody was on a 360-day year at that time. So it wasn't just it was a Jewish religious calendar. It was.
Well, they would add a month every so often to catch it back up.
Yeah.
Right?
Because you're still, I'm going to go out on a limb here again, but I think you're still going on lunar cycles as well. So you got to catch up to that lunar cycle. You got to make a difference in it. Yeah, an adjustment for that.
So compared to ours, we have 5 1/4 more days than they do every year.
Yeah.
So
That's why that will,
That's why we're behind the times.
that doesn't quite make sense, because that should be every 6th year would be a little month. So, I don't know.
Now, I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but
It's just interesting. I just think it's interesting.
yeah.
Easter is established.
I looked it up on what month.
have to do the math, 6 1/4, how many years?
That's your department. What's the statistics on that?
So here's a little interesting fun fact that doesn't have anything to do with any of this. The Earth is really in actually a bubble. Our whole solar system is in a bubble.
In a bubble.
Yeah. It's some, now, they think it's because of supernovas that have pushed off gas and they created this bubble and our solar system moved into it.
It's right there.
Now, to me, it's all about supernova. So we're going to start calling it.
Our solar system moved into this.
And, yeah, and so any, how do they do this? Any star development or celestial developments that happen, all happen outside of that bubble. They'll never be close enough to us to actually touch us. I don't have all the things on that, but I just, when I come across stuff like that, because Hope does a science class that's all outer space stuff, or at least most of it, so I find these things and send them to her.
Comments and debris and stuff enters our bubble, right?
They're all part of our solar system.
They're in your bubble.
Yeah, they're already in our bubble.
Kind of like Daisy. In your bubble.
She does not have a bubble.
She's in yours. You don't need her.
Her front end's in one person's bubble, her butt thing is in another person's bubble.
All right, so I'm going to try to get back on track for one, and try to bring out some new things that I've learned about, and it's really another person's observation of the physical part of Jesus' death on the cross, from the beatings and all of that. You hear a lot of people talk about how he would be going through shock because of blood loss. He'd be going through, and this person is kind of pushing back on some of that a little bit. So it's an interesting thought. But anyhow, one of the verses that I wanted to look at is John 10:18. This is obviously before the cross. So he's talking about being a good shepherd. This is around one of his I am statements. In verse 11 it says, I am the good shepherd, right? That would be one of the things. And he's talking about how shepherds would lay down their lives for the flock. They would literally, when they were in corrals or whatever, these stone corrals, they were the door. That's another reason why Jesus said, I am the door. They would be the gate to that corral. They would lay down there. They would make their camp right there so that nothing could come in without them knowing about it to get to the sheep. He makes the other statement, I am the good shepherd, and I know my sheep and am known by my own. As the Father knows me, even so I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And other sheep I have which are not of this fold. We should be thankful for that. Them also I must bring, and they will hear my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd. Therefore my Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it again. This command I have received from my Father. And that goes on to inspire all kinds of dissension and divide camps that are both actually against him, but they don't know which stone to throw, right? But focusing on that statement, I have the power to lay down my life and the power to take it again. That's knowing that comes before the cross and the resurrection. We can see Jesus' plan right there, right? I'm going to lay down my life and I'm going to take it back again. Now, leading up to this whole thing, and I had a whole bunch of medical things written down. So, Debbie, you might have to help me with some things. All right. So we're going to start in the garden, where it tells us that he sweat drops of blood. That's an actual medical condition. Yeah, not everybody has it. Not everybody can do it, from what I can understand. Actually, this person said there's only been 14 cases in the world that have ever been reported to have had that happen. And so what it is in your sweat glands, there's the capillaries, and they burst or they rupture, and then that blood mixes with your sweat, and it comes out and it looks like you're bleeding, which you really are. It really is blood coming out with your sweat. So we see that happen in the garden. Think about what that would have looked like when they showed up. Because if it happens in all of your sweat glands, that means it's running down your forehead already, in your face. If you've ever had a time, whether it was stress, physical, because of heat, or whatever, where you're sweating a lot, where you sweat through your shirt, think about that being red. So it's not just going to be just clear. It's not just going to be a water stain. It's going to have red tint to it already when they show up to arrest him. So you have that. Now, this person that I was listening to pointed out that this would have been in the cool of the night. This isn't a condition that you would bleed to death from. So there's that. But a lot of his wounds, as extensive as they were, happen in the cool time of the year and in the cool of the night. So blood loss would have been not maybe as extreme as we think it would have been normally, right? So keep that in mind as well. That was one of the points that this person was making. So they come in, they arrest him, and we see from the accounts in his arrest, the beatings start right in the garden. So they come in, they bind him up, and they already start beating on him then. Obviously, this has to happen after he puts Malchus's ear back on, because by now he's restrained. But we also see the demonstration of his power that goes along with this verse when they come in and he says, who are you looking for? And they say, Jesus of Nazareth, and he says, I am he, and they all fall down. And then, in my mind, he lets them get back up again. How confused are you already? If you can't stand up in this guy's presence, but then we're going to replay this again and say, who are you looking for? And they say, Jesus of Nazareth. And he says, I've already told you that I'm he. So now you have him, even at that point, acting, one, as deity. He can control whether they stand or not. And two, as fully man, in that he doesn't knock them back over. And he lets them take him. And again, you have the skirmish there, and Peter probably trying to take Malchus's head off, instead only just takes an ear off, and Jesus puts it back on. And then everybody leaves. Mark tells us that there was a young man there that was caught by his coat, and he wiggled out and got away. And so some people think maybe that's Mark that was following them out, because there's some sense that the upper room may have been in Mark's family's home. And so that he had access to them. He may have been, curious kid, spy him out, follow him out to the garden, not really part of the 12, but sneaking out there. Some people think it was John because he was the youngest of the 12. So it could have been a reference to him. There's a lot of speculation about the unnamed followers. So that one, and then the disciple who lets Peter into the yard or into the courtyard, whether or not that was John, because his family would have been, and I forget how this is established, but would have been possibly related to or axe handle related to the high priest family. And so he's already in, and he gets Peter in. And we know that those two literally one day run together, right? They run to the tomb together. So they come in, you have the illegal trials, assembling at night, assembling in a hurry, making decisions without, when they have the Jewish trial, when they have the trials and the Sanhedrin are there, they're supposed to hear the case. They're supposed to have lawyers for the defendant, no lawyers for Jesus. And they're not supposed to make a decision on that trial then. They're supposed to go home and think about it and contemplate the whole thing and make sure they're making a right decision. All happens, bang, 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 right then. And during the trial, they strike Jesus. And at the end of the trial, they all converge on him and take a shot at him. All things that are illegal at a Jewish trial. And in that night, he has 3. Then he's condemned as a blasphemer. So we're going to take him to Pilate, right? They've given him the death penalty. They take him to Pilate and ask him to be put to death, but not before blasphemy, because Pilate wouldn't care. Romans already had multiple gods. They don't care about one more God. They didn't care that the Jews had their temple that they worshiped, that they sacrificed. They didn't care. Sorry. So instead, he has to be an insurrectionist. Right? He's got to have declared himself to be a king. That's what the charge is now. He's made himself out to be a king like Caesar. And even to the point where they will pronounce their dedication to Caesar. Right? They're going to say, there is no king but Caesar. Something they shouldn't have said. Anyways, eventually Pilate's going to take him and have him, well, first he's going to send him to Herod, where he's going to be mocked and ridiculed there. He's going to be sent back to Pilate. He's going to be scourged. And the scourging is where things get real ugly. They would have stripped him naked. They would have tied him to a post where his back was exposed. If you watch The Passion of the Christ, they flip him over at some point and start whipping him in the front. That wouldn't have probably happened. Rome is too good at the torture and the of what this is all going to be. Right? So they would have probably kept him on his back because that protects the organs. There's too much muscle, too much fat to get to the vital organs. If you throw them over on their back and start whipping them in the front, you're going to lay them open and kill them right there. And you're going to have access to the organs pretty quickly. A lot of people want to point out that the law said you would have like 40 lashes minus 1 so that you didn't go over, but that's Jewish law. That's not Roman law. In this cat of 9 tails, you have 9 leather straps on a wooden handle. You have lead balls on there, or some kind of balls, iron or lead, and that would carry the weight of that strap so that when you hit, those would wrap and they would hit. And then in there is bone, and probably some other things in there too, but they would put pieces of bone in there that were a certain length so that it would literally make ribbons out of your back. This guy pointed out, because he had the dimensions of that bone, what the cut that it would have made would have been about, let's see if I can get this right, if I remember right, is 6 inches long and a 3/4 to an inch deep for each piece of bone in those straps. He said it's enough to have, I'm going to have my numbers probably wrong, but like 26 stitches for each cut to close them back up. All right. All said and done, he said that at least probably 3,000 stitches to get him completely closed back up after they were done with him. That's what it would have taken. This would have dug into the skin, grabbed a hold of the muscle, and pulled the muscle out in strips outside of the skin. The idea was, when they put him on the cross, most people don't die as fast as Jesus did. That's what, remember, they have to break the legs of the thieves, which is a point to keep in mind for a little bit. But the idea was, you're going to be up there for a while. That would attract the birds to come and pull at you, right? So you were exposed to the weather elements, but you were also exposed to the birds, and in some cases where the crosses were a little lower, you might be exposed to wild dogs as well, coming and chewing on you. They were, Rome had turned this into really just the ultimate form of torture and humility, or humiliation, not humility, because you're hanging up there naked on top of it. So you get to this point in a lot of people's description, and they start saying, well, you know, he probably was in shock. The problem with him being in shock is that he would have lost just an immense amount of blood, which obviously he's losing quite a bit of blood. But this guy points out the problem with him being in shock is he still carried his crossbar for probably 3/4 of a mile. He was able to be coherent on the cross. His words are completely understandable. He's able to recognize people. He recognizes his mother. He recognizes John. So that he probably wasn't actually in shock. He maintained all the way through this. So that points to his health of his body before all this happens to him. That while he's not, you know, head and shoulders above anybody else, he's not like Mr. Super attractive to attract all these people in and all that. What attracts them in, we've already seen in Luke, are his words and what he does, the miracles that he performs. That's what brings the crowds. And it's both. So you have a crowd, but then within that crowd you have his disciples, and then within those disciples you have the 12. But his disciples, he has a group that follows him all over the place. Again, you get to the book of Acts, and you have Matthias and I can never remember the other guy's name. The two they cast lots for. Matthias ends up being the next, the one to replace Judas. Now I gotta know. All right, so Joseph called Barsabbas, who was surnamed Justus. So that guy has 3 names, and Matthias. And Matthias is the one that the lot falls to. But it said of those two that they followed him all throughout the ministry. They were there all the time. There are probably 2 that were sent out when he sends out the 72. Or he sends out the 12, 2 at a time. Then he turns around and sends out 72, 2 at a time. These 2 guys probably were part of that. Being that they were accredited as being with them the whole time. At some point along the way, if you go to Isaiah 52, verse 13, this is a prophecy about this time as he goes to the cross. It says, "Behold, my servant shall deal prudently. He shall be exalted and extolled and be very high. Just as many were astonished at you, so his visage was marred more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men." Right, so that right there in verse 14 is talking about his beating, to the point of, literally this means he didn't look like a person anymore. He was beaten so bad. In another place in Isaiah, it talks about his beard being pulled out. Or maybe that's... Huh? Yeah. Tell me, I got, you know, I've got a little granddaughter who's not, only almost 10 months old. And she tries, you know. And Penelope used to just, she'd sit there being so soft and gentle, and then I'd realize she's working her fingers in there, and she'd get them twisted around, and then she would just, yeah. Thanks for being the influence. Andy, did you look up Psalm 22? Huh?
I like you got anything else to do.
Right. Time for you to get back on the bike, boy. Yeah, go ahead and read that. No, don't read it to yourself. Oh, yep.
Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me? From the ridge of my groaning. Oh my God, I cry in the daytime, but you do not hear. In the night season, I am not silent. But you are holy, enthroned in the liberty. Our fathers trusted in you, they trusted in you. They cried to you and were delivered. They trusted in you and were not ashamed. But I am a worm and no man, a reproach of men and despised by the people. All those who see me ridicule me. They shoot out the lip, they shake the head, saying, he trusted in the Lord, let him rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. But you are he who took me out of the womb. You made me trust while on my mother's breast. I was cast upon you from birth, from my mother's womb. You have been my God. Be not far from me, for trouble is near, and none to help. Many bulls have surrounded me, strong bulls of Bashan encircled me. They gave at me with their mouths like a raging and roaring lion. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax, it is melted within me. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue clings to my jaws. You have brought me to the dust of death. The dogs have surrounded me, the congregation of the wicked has enclosed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. They look and stare at me. They divide my garments among them. For my clothing they cast lots. But you, O Lord, do not be far from me. All my strength hasten to help me. Deliver me from the sword, my precious life from the power of the dog. Save me from the lion's mouth, from the horns of the wild ox. You have answered me. I will declare your name to my brethren. In the midst of the assembly I will praise you. You who fear the Lord, praise him. All you descendants of Jacob, glorify him and fear him, all you offspring of Israel. For he has not despised nor abhorred the affliction of the afflicted, nor has he hidden his face from them. For when he cried to him, he heard him. My praise shall be of you in the great assembly. I will pay my vows before those who fear him. The poor shall eat and be satisfied. Those who seek him will praise the Lord. Let your heart live forever. All the ends of the world shall remember and turn to the Lord. All the families of the nations shall worship before you. For the kingdom is the Lord's, and he rules over the nations. All the prosperous of the earth shall eat and worship. All those who get down to the dust shall bow before him. Even he who cannot keep himself alive. And posterity shall serve him. It will be recounted of the Lord to the next generation. They will come and declare his righteousness to the people who before, that he has done.
So in the first part of this, you have the description of a time coming, his rejection, and then the beatings. Some of this is him on the cross, especially when you get to 12 and it talks about the bulls that have surrounded him, and they gape at him with their mouths. So they're cursing at him. They're mocking him, that kind of thing. It says, all my bones are out of joint, but you look down farther, and he can count all of his bones. In verse 17, I can count all my bones. That's important. He didn't have any bones broken. So think about this, even in the beatings, where they're beating him in the face. His jaw's not broken. He's a strong dude. His jaw's not broken. Teeth are probably not busted out. All because none of his bones can be broken. And why is that? Because the Passover lamb can have no broken bones. So for him to be able to fulfill that part of the Passover, his bones had to all be able to be counted. And that's what he said, that all my bones can be counted. So my heart is like wax and has melted within me. I think that speaks more to his broken heart, right? Imagine, I mean, these people are beating on him. They take him out and they scourge him. And all of that, if they would turn after this, after the cross, all of that is for their benefit. Everything they do to him is potentially for their benefit. Even standing in front of Pilate and saying, crucify him, give us Barabbas. It's all a part of this whole scenario that has to happen, all for their potential benefit if they'll turn in the end. And there's a possibility that they do. Because on the day of Pentecost, 3,000 people come to the Lord. There's a real possibility, not necessarily for the Gentiles that were participating in this at the time, but there's a real possibility that any of the Jews that got worked up into that mob, into that frenzy later on, are part of the group that says, what must we do to be saved? You know, because Peter, in his first couple of sermons, he didn't pull any punches. I'm pretty sure it's more than once that he talks about Jesus, whom you crucified. He pokes his finger right in your eyeball, as much as he can. You did this. You played a part in this. So he's beaten, and he has that cross, which was probably about the crossbar that he would carry. Is probably 125 to 150 pounds. So after being beaten, now he's sleep deprived. And this guy points out sleep deprived, not just because he was arrested and then all this goes on through the night where he's taken back and forth and probably in the old city of Jerusalem, back and forth between the trials, walks over 2 miles. And then carries his cross about 3/4 of a mile. Or however much of that he did before the Gentiles made Simon carry it the rest of the way for him. Not Peter, but isn't that his name? Yeah. Simon the Cyrene, right. So he, oh man, I had so many notes. Trying to remember. Get halfway here and I'm like, oh, left them sitting there. So he has the scourging. He's beaten some more, mocked some more by the Romans. Takes the crown of thorns, that's put on his head, 1.5 to 3 inch long thorns. And like they probably can't even handle it themselves without getting stuck. And then take that and press that down on their head. And if you've ever had your head cut open, you know it bleeds a lot. It's very, they call it vascular. To the point where if they had to, they can put an IV in your head, like through the veins that are in your head. So he has that shoved down, and that would have gone down and into his skin, especially if we get to the side of the head. So it would have traveled some. It's not just poking him. Like you get into your rose bush and try to trim that, or you're trying to pick raspberries, you get poked. You get these things stuck in you. Locust trees that have, honey locust trees, have thorns similar to those. If you've ever spent any time in the woods, you might find a tree that has some big thorns in it. Huh?
Trees.
Yeah. So,
My mom was mowing under one time. She caught a thorn right.
yeah.
I mean, it was a gash that long. And then she coming in and she puts her hand over the water and blood. I'm like, I couldn't tell for a while
Yeah.
how big of a gash it was. You know?
Yep. So his eyes are swollen. A lot of people say, oh, by now his eyes are swollen shut. Well, he has to carry his cross. He has to be able to see where he's going. And he has to be able to recognize Mary and John. So his eyes aren't completely swollen shut. There are things about him that just still let us know, if we think about these details long enough, that he was so in control. Things could only go so far and no more, because he had to be able to do certain things while he's on the cross. And then you have the 7 statements of Jesus on the cross, all fully coherent when they're spoken. He knows what he's saying. Put on the cross, often the wrist, especially back then, the wrist and hand were considered the hand, this whole area. So when they put the nails, the Romans would put the nails in there between the 2 bones of your wrist, and they get to miss a vein. 2 arteries. Yeah. So they get to miss that. But they do hit a nerve on the backside as it comes back out. So all of that pain from the nerve. Same with the feet. Goes through a point where there's no arteries and comes out where there's nerves in the bottom of your feet. And I mean, they're like hitting main nerves. It's not like it's just a bunch of nerves down there and you just hit a few. They're hitting main nerves. They know how to do this. They've turned this into torture. They know exactly what they're doing to make it as painful as possible. They say that the Persians started crucifixion and then the Romans took it and tuned it up. So they would put you on that crossbar and then they would either attach it to the pole and then raise everything up and let it drop into a hole, or they would have a way to hoist you up and set that. And so his cross probably wasn't like it was probably more like a capital T than a lowercase t except for that, it can't be, because the sign is nailed above his head that says his crime is that he's the King of the Jews. So there had to be an extension above, right?
Unless his head was at the top and it was attached.
Somehow, yeah. So add to all of that, you've been abandoned by everybody who's close to you. Well, except for 2 people. You have Mary and you have John, which gives you 2 witnesses, right? And God's always got 2 witnesses. He has 2 disciples in the courtyard to see all the trials happen, and to see Peter. One of them is Peter, and he's the one that denies him the 3 times. And then you have at the cross, you still have Mary and John there. So his brothers are not there for Jesus to say, hey, James, behold your mother, and Mary, behold your son. Instead, he says it to John, the disciple John, who's the only one who was willing to go and be that close. To be able to speak, he would have had to push up to let breath out, because everything with your hands out and the whole thing is designed again for you to be down. The beating, the scourging would have gone from your shoulders all the way down the back of your legs. So think about that. Every time you push up to speak, that's all running up and down this rough post. But you have to, if I remember it, you have to be down to take a breath. You have to be up to let a breath out, or to be able to speak. So that, again, is why in this particular case they would go and break the legs of the thieves, because it would make them suffocate, right? They would go down to suffocate. But when they go to Jesus, he's already dead. Now, there's some discussion about whether it is the pericardium around the heart, the sac around the heart where the water would have gathered, or if it would have just been his blood had pooled inside of him and that he would have been dead for a half an hour to an hour, which means then that the plasma and the red blood cells would have separated. And so you would have had the clear sitting on top of the red. So when that spear came up, through and under his rib cage and up in, that either way, that blood and water would have come out in that kind of fashion. But it points to that he's already dead, and he shouldn't be dead yet. Not as far as the Romans are concerned. And again, you have the two thieves that are there. They've probably gone through a very similar ordeal, and they're still alive. And there's reports of, they expected people to be alive for days on the cross. And there's one instance that is reported that a man lived for 13 days on the cross. Can you imagine that? Yeah, don't want to imagine that. Here's the other thing. So here's the other part of this that adds to the wickedness of all this happening, is that this wasn't just a form of punishment. This was also a form of entertainment. People went out to see. People went out to yell at him and say things to him, and laugh at him and mock him, whoever was there. So he wasn't just people that were mad at him, wanted to murder him, and had their way with him. This is also, in the hearts of many, a good time. So not good time like, hey, we're going to go bass fishing and catch some fish. Good time. But this is and listen, you see it in people still today. It's blood sport. It is to inflict pain and harm because it gives you a thrill, and your participation in that. And you think about it, it was on a bigger scale than this. Even if you were in Rome or any place where there was any kind of coliseum, and there were people being fed to animals and fighting, gladiators fighting, and all of that. They were there to see all of that. Yeah.
One thing that when we were in Israel, what we noticed was the Golgotha, the place of the skull, where they crucified people was at the base of that hill. That's a major road, major thoroughfare going in and out of Israel, into the city of Jerusalem. So here we got people leaving from Passover. Everybody's walking by this place.
Yeah.
It's right there on the edge of the street. So there was like thousands of people that would probably been walking through there when we sat.
Yeah, because there were so many people there for the Passover time, that whole week, that Jerusalem's population like tripled or something. I mean, it was an inordinate amount of people. Not the ordinary amount of people coming and going. It wasn't just like caravans of businessmen and whatever, people selling their stuff and all that. This is families. This is, all kinds of people coming and going. And it would be big groups, right? Because you didn't travel alone. You traveled in big caravans. So big groups of people coming and going. And they would have been, you would walk in, potentially, you could walk in and see this, walk back out and see this. And so on a regular crucifixion thing, we're not worried about getting people down for a Sabbath, where they're up there for multiple days. That's, you're coming and going. If they were left up there for that whole week, where they would maybe go back down to Bethlehem or wherever, they might go, or outside of the city to camp, wherever their caravan was camped, and then come back in, you're passing that stuff multiple times. So it's, one, to set an example, don't cross Rome, and two, it was entertainment. And that's, But, you know,
Yeah, you think about the number of people that were in the group when Jesus was 12. You know, I mean, there were so many people that they didn't know where he was at.
yeah.
So, that would give you an idea of how many people might have been traveling that thing.
Yeah, they would say there were at least a couple million people that were in and around Jerusalem during Passover feast time. It was a required feast. So every able-bodied male Jew at least had to be there. And if you were outside of the scope of you know, feeling like you were required to come, you were still encouraged to come from a long ways away even, if you could do it. So you have all of that. He says his things. Now, getting to that last, I'm going to wrap this up. It's gone longer than I thought it was going to. In the end, when it says he gave up his spirit, right? He says, "It is into your hands I commit my spirit," and it says, and then he died. Gave up his spirit. We look at this whole ordeal and we say, well, this all happened at the hands of men, and it did. They crucified him for sure. But they didn't take his life. And go back to that verse in John. Nobody gets to take my life from me, but I'm going to lay it down, and I have the authority to take it back. And so he was already dead before he was supposed to be, because it was done. He said it was finished. It's done. The work that he had to do was complete. And then he was just, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit, and then done. He breathes his last, or gives up the ghost, like the King James says. So just keep that in mind. That's something I kind of really needed to be reminded of. We didn't kill him. Right? Nobody took his life. Right to the very end, nobody took his life from him. They beat him. They wanted to take credit for having taken his life. For sure, it's our sin that put him on the cross. So we put him up there. He went up there for us. But the reality of it is really we didn't. He literally went for us. And went through all of that on his own. And even when they offered him the drink that would numb the pain a little bit, he wouldn't take it. So he could feel everything. And he did that for us to pay for our sin. And then on top of that, so we just describe all of that, and still in my mind, the worst part, the 3 hours of darkness where he takes on the wrath of God on top of it. So he's on that cross as a man, fully man, but still fully God, and takes on the wrath of God, something that none of us could ever do. If we fall under the wrath of God, we're done. But he didn't. He wasn't done. He was able to enter into that time and survive that. And defeat, I don't want to say defeat the wrath of God, but be able to take it and then kind of throw it off. You know? And he wasn't fighting his Father. At the end he says, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. You know, there's no trouble with the relationship between the Son and the Father and the Spirit. This was their plan from the beginning. Knowing that Adam was going to sin, knowing that all this was going to happen, their plan from the beginning, and they still made us. And they still made the way. And we have everything to be thankful for. Everything to be thankful for right now. This whole week needs to be a remembrance of what he did. But listen, don't forget, the cross is not the end, right? Not the end. He's coming out. Huh?
It's the beginning of our salvation.
Yeah. He is the author and finisher of our faith. the completer. He will complete it, and it'll be complete one day. The tomb is not the end. They're really, remember when we talked about this when we started Genesis? Because Genesis means beginnings, right? New beginning. And I asked you guys to look back at Revelation, and we call it the end times, but there's a new beginning coming. There's another Genesis coming. Another beginning. All right, let's pray. Lord, thank you for this time to be more personal with each other and interactive with each other and to look at what you've done. And Lord, to really still not have a clue what you went through. But Lord, I hope that remembering this helps us to endure whatever we may face for you, whatever we may face as a consequence of our own sin, knowing, Lord, that one day we're going to be with you face to face because of what you have done and because of the grace and mercy that you have given us that allows us to be in your presence. Thank you for all of this, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.